All right, at this point, I feel like I have a good approach set. The refined lines are making a big difference. If I turn everything else off, I can see that I haven't done much in this area, haven't done much on the hair at all, haven't done anything with the neck or the collar of the shirt. So these are the areas I need to work on with the refined lines so that everything's brought up to the same finish. And you can see these refined lines together. They look a lot like kind of pastel strokes. They have a nice consistency to them. I want to be able to run that up over everything. And I might even try taking down the opacity of some of the other layers, especially my rough sketch layer, to help make that happen. Now the only problem with playing with opacity then is then the background colors blend into it. So now I might go back to the white as a background so that I'm really having to make those decisions about what gets filled in. But then I'm going to lock those layers again. Turned off my desaturated version. And I hit my refined paint where I know it needs, the most attention, which is in the eyes, around the outside of the hair, this part of the cheek and mouth, and the collar. So, little self-critiques and assessments are necessary as you go. And we just keep jumping in. Try to bring the same level of finish to everything. Sometimes I'll intentionally kind of mess myself up, paint something that's a little too strong, just so I have to blend it out, and that helps to smooth. Basically making the same decisions over and over again about where certain features should be, how strong they should be. It's going to strengthen your overall approach. So maybe the most helpful technique that you'll just get a lot of practice at is painting with a color you select and then choosing that color that's created by painting at the lower opacity and then reselecting that and just doing that back and forth to blend, and you get all the different color variations in between multiple edges. Like if I want to force some red into the tip of the nose, even though it's so dark, what I might do is kind of pick that color, paint it in, and then blend with the colors around it until it feels more natural. And once I have that, I can kind of steal that approach and use it in other places, especially where the highlights are too strong or not quite earned yet. And to me in digital painting, it's not such a big deal to be sloppy. That's not as big a crime as being timid. So everything starts out sloppy. You always want to be aware of your value range and that you're not just letting everything turn to mud. It was just Easter last weekend, and the common thing you do when you're dyeing Easter eggs as a kid is you dip it in all the different colors, and you just end up with a muddy brown. Even though it could be a deep, rich, complex brown. In order to really control your values and your colors, you have to leave one as dominant. So I have this overall strategy where it's mostly yellow for highlights, mostly blues for shadows. And then my yellows and oranges kind of build in between, in the midtones, between those highlights and shadows. It's good to kind of set up a system like that for yourself. Just an understanding of what your palette is, your choices. That will make it a little bit easier as you're trying to model the form, especially when the form gets tricky. The hardest thing, I think, the trickiest thing about digital painting is the edge control. And it's really something you only have to worry about at the end. So the reason the hair looks the way it does is because it has lots of sharp edges, but then when it gets to the hairline, it's really quite soft. And there's no cheating that. You have to be able to paint that in. Paint those complicated soft edges that don't always make the shapes you would expect. The shadows that form on the face as it moves, they're called form shadows, because the skin is obviously mostly the same local color everywhere. Though there are some differences, like around the eyes versus around the mouth and the forehead. Form shadows tend to be soft, so all these wrinkles in the forehead, even though they really show up, you squint and they're there, they need to be soft on their edges so they feel like it's all part of the same material. Hard edges, the most crisp edge are going to come from these cast shadows, like you see that shadow that the shirt gives off. So that needs to be really precisely placed and exact. It even shoots a little bit beyond his neck in order to turn. Nostrils are a good example of a cast shadow. You need it to be fairly crisp, even if you're painting with a soft brush, right on the inside of the nostril. And then it softens out as it turns to a form shadow on the side of the nostril that touches the face. So the reason we're not painting lines like digital painting with line work is because one side of the line is almost always softened. And you can use the smudge tool, or you can use this kind of blending color selection that I've been showing you. But you'll need to pay attention to those edges in order to really control modeling, whether it looks dimensional or not. Color can in some ways be a crutch that you can use. But underneath all that color, of course, is always a gray value, and that either works or it doesn't. Now, a great class that goes along with digital art is design, whether you do it on the computer or whether you do it by hand. Design 1, which is two-dimensional design, helps you realize kind of the power of value and contrast. And then when you are comfortable with that, then you get into the color theory aspects of two-dimensional design, and how strongly they can kind of lead your eye around. And that's what I mean by color can be a crutch. It can do a lot of the work for you if you know how to use it. Warms and cools to kind of suggest form. Ultimately, you need to learn to be comfortable with it enough so you can play with it, so you can have fun. Now, the reason I'm not zooming in at all and finishing off these things like I did with the forehead to get started is because I really want everything to kind of come to a finish together. So I'm just working on the areas I think need it with the goal of having it all just kind of snap together and feel like it's finished. Like every part is considered, and I've done everything I can with the technique I've chosen to make it successful and engaging. And I think I can get there with this without having to zoom in too much. Because every time you zoom in, you kind of lose sight of the big picture. I'm going to try to go along with the skin, the direction of the skin, as I'm kind of weaving these tones of color together. Kind of restates the shape of the face with each stroke. I really have to knock down these white highlights that are coming through. Don't really fit. And I have to acknowledge some of these harder details, like the shadow underneath the nostril as it's touching the skin. Little architectural instances. The crease and the angle of that upper lip, you see it's catching a lot of light there. It's almost like a cast shadow, even though it's still all the skin. The highlight is so different than the shadow there.